all the mighty men of Israel, and they, fought against the enemies of Israel. So we fight the good fight of faith with our work in film and video production. Actually, our most popular series is on the history of the Bible. A Lamp in the Dark, Untold History of the Bible. And that's where I did the research on the history of the Bible leading into the Great Reformation. And then in response to the Reformation, the Vatican, the Pope, launched the Counter-Reformation. And that's where the founding of the Jesuit order came in. Their purpose was to overturn the Protestant Reformation and try to bring mankind back into the Dark Age. So that's where I first started learning about Jesuits.
And as I looked at it, to me it was sort of part of a segment, shall we say, a piece of what's going on in the whole globe. If you look at the entire world and look at the history of the East and the West, and you try to put it all together in your head, it gets very confusing. But if you focus on the things that have happened in the last 1,000 years, and in particular, the religious transactions that mankind has gone through for the last 1,000 years, suddenly everything in the present is a little bit more focused. And that's what happened to me as I watched this American Jesuits. You mentioned Abe Lincoln a minute ago, and there's a lot about Abe Lincoln in this,
right.
and I was fascinated. Tell us about how you figured Abraham Lincoln into a film called American Jesuits.
Well, because of a series of books that were written during the time of the American Civil War, and as a result of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. There were a series of writers who lived through that time who believed that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by the Jesuit order. One of them was a Catholic priest named Charles Chineke, who was the good friend of Lincoln, who knew Lincoln even before he became president. And as a result of investigating after he was assassinated, he said he spent 15 years investigating what happened and came to the conclusion that the Jesuits were behind his assassination. But probably the most authoritative figure from that time was a Union general, Thomas Maylie Harris. And General Harris served as a brigadier general during the Civil War, and then he sat on the committee to investigate the conspiracy to assassinate Lincoln. And he came to the conclusion that the Vatican and the Jesuits were behind the plot to kill Lincoln. They were the ones who manipulated John Wilkes Booth and Mary Surratt and John Surratt.
So now you mentioned, I was going to ask you about John Wilkes Booth. You have considerable information about him in this film, but I'm one of those people who thinks, okay, John Wilkes Booth, kind of a ne'er-do-well, got involved with the wrong people, passionately involved in politics and anti-politics, and finally came to the conclusion that it would be a good thing if Abraham Lincoln were killed. And he was passionate. And that's all I've ever thought about it. I've thought about him as kind of a lone marauder. But you connect him with other people and other movements that are going on at the time, and I think that's extremely valuable.
Well, the remarkable thing is that the stuff that we're documenting and showing to an audience is all from the people who lived through that time. General Harris, in fact, he was one of the judges on the court that condemned the conspirators. So he heard all of the evidence during the trial, he listened to the witnesses, he saw all the documentation, and years later he wrote a book called Rome's Responsibility for the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So he was that direct. But he says that Booth became a disciple of the Jesuit order, that they had trained him and they converted him. He says that Booth had been raised as a Protestant but was converted by the Jesuits, and he was found with a Catholic medal on him when he was killed. And when he leaped from the balcony and he shouted "Sic Semper Tyrannis," and
yes,
ran off. According to Charles Chineke, the Catholic priest, that was an expression, a Jesuitical view, that anyone who defied the Pope was to be killed, was condemned as a tyrant and a usurper because he didn't have papal authority. A lot of people don't realize that during the Civil War, the Pope was the one world leader who officially recognized the Southern Confederacy, wrote a letter to Jefferson Davis calling him the president of the Confederate States of America.
And you document that rather well in your film. In fact, that's what I love about this American Jesuits is the title. I love the way Chris has stated a fact, but he doesn't just leave it there. He then builds and shows you how this is connected to this and this and this, and suddenly the lights go on. And it's just great the way you do that.
Well, praise the Lord. I mean, I could have gone on really, Gary, for probably 5-6 hours because there's so much information. One of the remarkable things is all of the pastors, ministers, teachers, historians, great men of history like John Adams back in the 19th century, who said of the Jesuits, "I know of no body of men more deserving of eternal perdition on earth or in hell than these sons of Loyola," because they were founded by Ignatius Loyola. So that's John Adams writing to Thomas Jefferson. The evidence during the Civil War, we're talking about Lincoln, the evidence was so overwhelming that the Vatican and the Jesuits were behind the assassination of Lincoln that the United States government cut off diplomatic relations with Rome and with the papacy for over 100 years. And it was literally because of all the information that had been revealed through the trial and the documentation of General Harris, I think, in particular.
And this is, let's call this one set of facts.
Right.
But there are many, many, many others.
Right.
And they all fit together to make an amazing picture. We're talking to Chris Pinto. His film, American Jesuits, is